Welcome, everyone. Welcome back. I have a couple of questions, and I'll just dive in. But as I go, feel free to put others in chat. It's also fine to raise a hand if you would prefer. So this first one, it interests me. Just something I'm curious about. She writes, I have heard stories that the Dharma has degenerated over time, and also that Zen students have to surpass their masters by 1.5 times in order for the Dharma to continue in full strength. Are these just stories to spur students on to practice, or do you see any truth to them? Do you think that the insight that Zhongsha and Bodhidharma's other disciples had was any different than that which people are having in Sambo Zen now? Or is it one taste that everyone shares in, but that we taste in different degrees? Kind of like tasting a crumb of a fortune cookie as compared to eating the whole cookie. Wonderful question, and it does reflect various traditions. There's an early sutra that talks about the 3 ages of the Dharma. And according to that, although the time periods vary, it's thought that basically 2,000 years after the Buddha, we would be in the age of the decline. But that age, according to that sutra, was to last some 10,000 years. And what's touching about it is that, yes, according to that sort of taxonomy or cosmology, that rubric, what we're tasting and experiencing now isn't quite as deep and clear and powerful, you could say. I would pause on that. The part of it that is more touching than trying to weigh the depth of modern time experiences, our experiences, is that the concern for this waning of the Dharma, the measure of it, is that Shakyamuni Buddha's Dharma can no longer save people. So it's the power of this practice, this teaching, this fact to actually generate well-being in this world. Saving all beings, that's the vow. That's the practice. That's the heart of Kannon, that Avalokiteshvara, who chants, we chant the Heart Sutra, in which she, he, they chant about awakening to this deep wisdom. Everything gone, gone beyond. And the one who chants that is this Bodhisattva of great compassion. So there is a tradition that all of this richness is somehow going to, like the swelling waters, just with climate change, rather evaporate. I also like to hold side by side with that this image that Henry and others have mentioned of Zen in the West, this Dharma having come to the West. I mean, it was always here in a sense, because that's what this is. But the teaching, and the practice coming to the West is like a dwarf oak tree. And a dwarf oak tree lives for 900 years. It's another kind of rubric. The first 300 years, it's growing and developing and becoming a dwarf oak tree. The second 300 years, it's simply thriving, living as dwarf oak tree. And the last 100 years, it's dying, 300 years. According to that rubric, we're in the first 300 years. So it's, I would no way put some kind of measure on this. When I read these, keep company with these masters, Dzongchen, Bodhidharma, all of these ancestors, women and men. One can, it's like we're sitting in their awakening. And I have to say, I feel the power of that. And hope always to get clearer and get deeper. Part of it may be a life, of giving up everything for this Dharma, for this practice. And as, lay householders, we practice earnestly in a different context. But I do like the analogy of this cookie, or I've heard Henry use waterworks as an analogy. So all the ways that water moves and flows, oceans, rivers, lakes, rains, snows, puddles, faucets, little drips. And it's all water. It's all the same water. It is interesting that Ryon Roshi, the abbot of Sambozin, was named by his father, Ryon Roshi, surpassing Roshi. So clearly there was that spur that is mentioned in this question, that confidence also. I don't know how to measure that. I never met Komroshi, but people, his influence in this world continues so profoundly. And those who knew him in person said it was like sitting with a mountain of compassion to be in the room with him, the Zendo or the Doksan. I know he could be quite firm, so it's not soft. It's this mountain, and it's powerful. My own first experience, my opening, had in part, I just happened to glance at his picture, and suddenly something shifted. I do believe that people today are having very real experiences of this Dharma. In the koans, the masters will say, well, how do you see it? I see it like this. Fine, but that's 80%. And how will you see it, brother? Well, it's like this. Okay, maybe 90%. Ryon Roshi, often when we're studying with him in this public koan study, and he'll say 40%, 60%. But at the end of the day, 1%, 100%, doesn't matter. I mean, of course, we're always trying, this cry of the cuckoo never ceases. It's always calling us. But that cookie crumb is all of it. And when you taste it, now my practice can begin. That comes up again and again. It remains to be seen what happens to this tradition, this Dharma. I think there's a lot of promise. This question did bring to mind a verse in the Mumonkan. It's a little unusual. Mumon, it's just usually his verses point right back to the case. And this one that came to mind was about the responsibility, the burden of, coming into this practice, discovering this way and living it, with as much commitment as we can muster. And a lot of that commitment comes to us as a gift from the tradition. It's not just up to you, but the line goes, the first verse is, you must carry an iron yoke with no hole. And it goes on, it's not an easy task. This burden of bearing this tradition on for the next generation. He's quite serious about it. And the last line is, you must climb a mountain of swords with bare feet. It's precarious, but when I've done this koan, what always springs from this verse, is not just, it's this inordinate weight, and there's, how is this possible? But rather the 4 vows of the Bodhisattva, which I've heard Reuben say, mission impossible. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to free them. I vow to save them all. That's the heart of this practice. It's not just for me, not at all. It can't be. You cannot sit for yourself alone. We might start that way, but as soon as you get a taste of the Dharma, it shifts. Mission impossible, and yet it's happening all the time. So, thank you for the question. There's anybody interested in this, there's a lot. You can just Google the age of the decline of the Dharma and come across the sutra and others, and probably different interpretations and some counter voices in there. Just now, when I think of the teachers even that I know, this generation around the world, and in Sambo Zen, but also the American Zen Teachers Association, just amazing people who practice deeply, and I'm confident that they are passing on this Dharma. And part of that confidence is Shakyamuni Buddha is still practicing. That to me is a more powerful tradition than the sort of Chinese rubric of this age of decline. It's all going to go. You could sit in your sitting and face Shakyamuni Buddha. What happens then? There is something going on in Japan, I know it best there, where those once thriving monasteries and what it meant to be a monk or a priest, that has really changed. So it was all about practice and really practicing in the way of the Buddha. And it's shifted. So I've heard this from Rio and Roshi, others, that now the temples are basically inherited by family. You know, they're passed down, and it's like a job. So the priest does rituals for people, and very often they don't practice. It's just a service, and so in that way you could say, yeah, that's a real shift in what was once, this monastic tradition that gave us so many of the koans. But I am so grateful for this Dharma. And I don't think you can divide it at all. And one sip of water like that, just to take a sip of water and know for yourself if it's warm or cold, that intimacy that can blow away everything. Like David Hinton said, the Chan demolition team, they are alive and well in these koans and in this practice. Please say a little about the incomplete circle symbol above the Buddha on the altar. I skipped. Oh, that's beautiful. That's Peg's Enzo. And Janine, who is here, is a wonderful artist who has done hundreds of thousands of Enzos. And the tradition in that circle is to leave it a little bit open so that it's infinite. It's not closed. Sometimes you'll see them drawn where they look closed, but there's a little, the implication is that open circle, empty, infinite. Yeah, it's a symbol and expression for what you are. This student is wondering, thanks for the heartfelt teisho. I was wondering at what point you usually recommend a student to move from observing the breath to working with the koan Bu. I think part of that comes from the student's own curiosity or longing or sense of timing. That kind of comes together with finding a teacher. It's extremely helpful to have a guide when you start taking up Mu or Koan. It doesn't have to be someone that you see as frequently as, I got to see my teacher once or twice a week for 10 years. Just because of circumstances, it doesn't have to be that, but it's really helpful when you take up Mu. First of all, it's very helpful to be given it formally by a teacher, and then just to check in from time to time. I think that one measure of it is how consistent is your practice. I remember meeting a student sometime during this amazing COVID online era, and a serious practitioner, and it felt to me like, oh, Mu, wouldn't you like to have Mu? And the student said, I want to play my scales first, till the soil, just make sure. And I really respect that. And then within, I don't know, a few weeks or a month, it just seemed so natural to drop that seed into that earth. Yeah. But if you're sitting regularly, you've an established practice, and you're drawn to this, I would reach out to a teacher. Here's one from Mark. I have read that concentration is the first fruit of Zen practice. Despite many years of practice, I find that my ability to concentrate is still very poor. Does this reflect poor technique, inadequate time with practice, or some other deficiency? Or maybe it is so slow, it is like hair growing. You just don't notice it. Ah, love that analogy. Yeah, this first fruit, sometimes the Japanese word is joriki. It's kind of power of concentration, a growing, ability to sort of stay here now, or come back more freely, more readily. Notice that you're off and just come back without that extra, the add-ons that we do when we notice that we're not right here, that you've trailed off into thought. That's part of concentration. You go off, but you just notice it and come back. Notice it and come back. I also appreciate this sense of, concentration is not like the Rodin statue. This Western image, it's Zazen is quite different. And part of it for me is, I remember Rob Habito, my teacher, would say concentration, like dash there, and he meant, living out of the center of your being. So it's cultivating this capacity to simply be present on the cushion and off. And what happens in our lives with this fruit, our hearts become, I believe, more responsive, more generous. Henry likes the word tenderizer. This practice, you get more tender. All of that is, I would say, part of that fruit. I also don't feel that I have that kind of laser focus concentration. I think different people have a different quality of concentration. I've mentioned that I spent 2 weeks with this wonderful teacher, John Gaynor, in late May, co-leading a retreat session in Germany. And so we sat side by side. I've done this with him a number of times. And in long sitting, you can so readily just sense the concentration of the person next to you. It can actually be very helpful. And I had moments where I could actually see it. It was like a little tiny atomic acorn in this black space. There was this little pinprick or something. That was just my sense of it is so deep and energetic, this concentration. Whereas I feel my own is more of a quality of sort of spacious awareness quality. It varies. If it gets too spacious, I'll take up, and then it just starts to come in, like a jet coming in for a landing with every breath. But yeah, it's going on. It's all we need to do is sit. And there's no such thing as a bad sit. As you've all heard, the only bad sit is the sit you don't do. sometimes, I'll have a period of sitting that is more tossed about than seems to be whatever the norm is now. And, I just notice, well, there's a lot going on, or usually there's something that I can sense that's contributing to that. Sometimes, even with that kind of sit, um, it opens the heart and tends to orient us to being present in the world, when you get up off the cushion. You just never know. I love this comment by a teacher at Great Bow named Jogan. Somebody asked about his practice, how you weigh it, how you judge it. He said, how would I have any idea how my practice is going? I thought that was rather refreshing. He's just doing it. The koans, and even if you're not sitting with a koan, we hear about them in these teisho. It's part of the tradition. So most people began to become familiar with some of these awakening stories, these exchanges. And they're bearing something to us. The one that, the case that matches that verse I mentioned about carrying an iron yoke with no hole, this heavy burden. Because if the next generation will know, they need to find it from someone's. But that case is a window into this practice, and so many of them are. In that, this particular one, this national teacher, Echu, very renowned national teacher, he calls his attendant 3 times. And 3 times his attendant answers. Already right there, if you put yourself in that, you sit with that. What is going on? Who is calling? Who is answering? The last slide after that brief little description is the national teacher saying to his attendant, who presumably, he's answered 3 times. And the teacher says, I thought I was sitting all alone with my back to you. This top of heaven to the bottom of the earth. I alone. It's just one entirety, nothing outside it. That's the way it's put in this. I thought I was sitting all alone with my back to you. And then he says, but here you are, sitting all alone with your back to me. There you are. Each one, all of it. So take it to heart, both in a heartening way, as the question said, spurring us on, a loving way. It's not just the burden, it's the gift. And it's showing itself in your practice more than we can fathom. As the line went in the material I read today around Zongxi. There's another similar koan where Master Swigan, we get to, it's like a little window into his practice. They talk about concentration. Every day, Master Swigan would sit and call to himself, "Are you there?" "Yes." "Fully awake?" "Yes, yes." Don't be deceived by others. Anytime, anyway. No, no. This great master, he's sitting there. That's what he's doing. Calling, checking. Are you there? I remember Rian Roshi saying, someone said once to him, "What do you do when you sit?" It was so generous and just completely unguarded, nothing to guard. We said, sometimes I'm sitting shikantaza, just sitting. Sometimes I'm mooing. Sometimes I'm asking, what do you really see? Sort of his version of Swigan. Are you there? What do you really see? I was sitting here in the Zendo at Mountain Cloud yesterday, and this amazing clay wall with flecks of golden straw, cracks here and there. So much facing the wall, so much wall gazing, and that wall gazing back. And, there was a point in the sitting where it didn't seem strong enough. Like this question, my concentration, what are you there? And it just was like, just that intention. This riveting wall. And the chance in this very moment to look directly at it. Or you could take that the other way, that direct, turn the backward step, learn the backward step, and shine the light inward. That's another form of that looking, that concentration. What do you really see? Do inside and out hold up? Bodhidharma is looking at us and still teaching. In his very renegade way. So let's take it to heart. And let's take a short break and maybe have one final sit that we could start in about 5 minutes. Thank you, Peg. Thank you, everyone.